The text message arrived at 3:17 in the afternoon, a small, malevolent buzz against the polished concrete of my drafting table. It was from Clara, my wife of 7 years. The screen glowed with a casual cruelty that took my breath away. It said, "Going on vacation with my ex. Don't be jealous." Below the words was a smiling selfie of her, sunglasses perched on her head, the distinctive pattern of an airport departure lounge blurred behind her. For a moment, my mind refused to process it. It was a joke. It had to be a dark, unfunny joke. But Clara hadn't joked with me in years. Her humor, like her affection, had become a currency she spent elsewhere. I stood there, a drafting pencil still in my hand, the precise lines of a load-bearing wall on the blueprint before me seeming to mock the complete structural failure of my own life. I had just spent the last 4 hours meticulously planning the reinforcement of a historic building, and in a single sentence, my own foundation had been demolished. My name is David. I am, or was, a man who believed in structure. At 38, I worked as a structural engineer. I found comfort in the immutable laws of physics, in the honest relationship between stress and strain. I believed that if you built something correctly, with integrity and the right materials, it would last. I had applied the same philosophy to my marriage. I provided. I was loyal. I was present. I thought we were building a life, beam by sturdy beam. Clara, it seemed, was more interested in demolition. But let me start from the beginning. Our life wasn't always a field of rubble. When I first met Clara, her ambition was a fire that warmed me. She was vibrant, full of stories about the life she wanted to live, the places she wanted to see. I was quieter, a man who found beauty in schematics and the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved. I thought our differences complemented each other. She was the soaring, decorative facade, and I was the unseen, solid foundation making it all possible. I loved her for it. I worked hard, taking on extra projects, staying late to refine designs. Everything was for us, for the future we were designing together. The centerpiece of that future was a house I was designing myself, a secret project I poured my heart into after she went to bed, a place with clean lines, honest materials, and a view of the sunrise. The cracks started small, almost invisible. A sigh when I came home late, smelling of concrete dust and drafting paper. A comment about her friend Jessica's new luxury SUV. An eye roll when I suggested a weekend camping trip instead of a weekend at a boutique hotel. Her world was becoming a catalog of things we didn't have, and my contentment with what we did have was becoming a source of her irritation. She started talking more about Julian, her ex from college. He had been a vague specter from her past, a cautionary tale of youthful indulgence. But in her recent retellings, he was transforming into a legend. Julian, who started a tech company. Julian, who just bought a yacht. Julian, who understood, apparently, the finer things in life. I ignored it, dismissing it as a passing fancy, a harmless fantasy. I was a man who dealt in quantifiable stress, and this felt like a pressure I couldn't measure. I chose to believe in the structure we had built. It was a fatal miscalculation. After reading her text, I did not throw my phone. I did not sweep the blueprints from my desk. I simply sat down in my rolling chair, the one with the worn leather seat I'd had since college, and stared at the wall. The initial shock was like a physical blow, a concussive force that left a ringing in my ears. It was followed by a cold, creeping clarity. This wasn't a sudden event. It was the logical conclusion of a long, slow decay. The text wasn't an impulse. It was a declaration. It was her telling me, in the most dismissive way possible, that she was done. The phrase, "Don't be jealous," was the true poison. It wasn't a request. It was a command to know my place, to accept my demotion from husband to inconvenient obstacle. I sat for an hour, maybe 2. The sun dipped below the neighboring office building, casting long shadows across my desk. My phone remained dark. No follow-up text. No, I'm just kidding. Just the silence of her absence. My first instinct, the primal, wounded one, was to call her, to scream, to demand an explanation she clearly had no intention of giving. But what would that accomplish? It would give her the drama she probably craved. It would cast me in the role of the hysterical, jilted husband. It would give her power. And I realized, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I could not give her any more power over me. My mind, trained to see problems as a series of logical steps, began to shift away from the emotional wreckage and toward a plan. This was no longer a marriage to be salvaged. It was a controlled demolition. My hand was steady when I picked up my phone. I didn't look at her message again. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Mark. My oldest friend, my college roommate, and now one of the most ruthless and respected divorce attorneys in the city. We hadn't spoken in months, a casualty of my long hours and his own demanding career, but he was the one person I knew I could trust. He answered on the second ring. "David," he said, his voice sharp and professional. "Everything okay? You never call me during work hours." I took a breath. "Mark, I need a lawyer." There was a pause on the other end. "Clara?" he asked, his tone softening with understanding. He had never been her biggest fan, always seeing a transactional nature in her that I had willfully ignored. "Yes," I said. The word felt heavy, final. "Okay," he said, all business again. "First thing, do not contact her. Do not text, do not call, do not email. Do not respond to anything she sends you. Is that clear? She's on vacation. With her ex?" I said, the words tasting like ash. I heard him sigh, a sound of grim validation. "Of course she is." "Okay, David. This is good. This is a gift. She just handed us the entire case on a silver platter. But you have to be smart. From this moment forward, you are a ghost. You feel nothing. You say nothing. You are a black hole of information. She will try to provoke you. She will send texts, maybe call you crying from her hotel room in Cancun or wherever the hell she is with this clown. You do not respond. You forward everything to me. Everything. Got it. Got it. I repeated. The instructions were a lifeline. They were a blueprint. I understood blueprints. "Second," Mark continued, "we need to protect your assets. You still have that joint savings account." Yes. We were saving for a down payment on a house. The irony was a bitter pill. "Go to your bank. Right now. Withdraw 50%. Not a penny more. Just your half. Transfer it to a new account at a completely different bank. An account only in your name. Do it today. Then, get copies of all our financial statements for the past 3 years. Bank accounts, credit cards, retirement funds, everything. I want a complete financial picture." "Okay," I said, already making a mental checklist. This was familiar territory. Data collection, analysis, strategy. "And David," Mark said, his voice dropping slightly, "I'm sorry. I know you loved her." "I did," I said, and for the first time, a crack appeared in my composure. "I really did." "I know," he said. "Now use that. Turn it into fuel. Be cold. Be methodical. We're not going to get angry. We're going to get everything." I hung up the phone and felt a strange calm settle over me. The pain was still there, a deep, tectonic ache in my chest. But now it was contained. Mark had given me a framework, a set of instructions. He had turned my emotional crisis into an engineering problem. And I was very, very good at solving problems. I packed up my briefcase, turned off the lights in my office, and walked out into the evening, not as a heartbroken husband, but as a man with a project. The next morning, I was at the bank 10 minutes before it opened. The teller who helped me was a cheerful young woman who remembered me and Clara from when we opened the account. "Big withdrawal, Mr. Miller," she said with a smile. "Finally buying that dream house?" I simply nodded, my face a polite mask, and signed the paperwork. I walked across the street to a competing bank and opened a new account in my name only. The first step was complete. That afternoon, I went home and began the methodical process of archaeology, digging through years of our shared digital life. I downloaded bank statements, credit card bills, and cell phone records. The picture that emerged was uglier than I could have imagined. Clara hadn't just been dissatisfied. She had been actively siphoning our future. There were hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars a month spent at high-end boutiques I'd never heard of. Charges for spa days and lunches at restaurants she told me were too stuffy. while I was eating a sandwich at my desk to save money. She was living a life I was not invited to, funded by the hours I was working for our supposed future. The most damning evidence came from the credit card statements. A charge from 2 months ago for 2 plane tickets to St. Bart's. The charge was from a boutique travel agency. On a hunch, I called them. Playing the part of the doting husband planning a surprise anniversary trip, I asked if they kept client travel preferences on file. The agent, eager to help, confirmed it. "Oh yes, Mr. Miller. We have your wife's file right here. She and Mr. Julian Vance are some of our best clients. They love the beachfront villas, Mr. Julian Vance. So this wasn't a one-time fling. This was a pattern. A lifestyle. My marriage wasn't just broken. It was a fraudulent enterprise." I saved the PDFs, named them with clinical precision, Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C, and emailed them to Mark with a single subject line, documentation. His reply was immediate. "Excellent. Keep digging." That evening, my phone lit up with a call from Clara. I stared at her picture on the screen, a photo of us from a happier time, hiking in the mountains. Her smile looked genuine in the picture. Now it just looked like a lie. My thumb hovered over the answer button. The urge to hear her voice, to hear the lie, almost overwhelming. But Mark's voice echoed in my head. "Be a ghost." I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text appeared. "Not picking up? So childish. Just wanted to say hi. The weather here is amazing. You'd hate it. LOL." The casual cruelty was breathtaking. She was taunting me, daring me to react. I took a screenshot, saved it as Exhibit D, and sent it to Mark. For the next 10 days, I lived a double life. By day, I was the same dependable engineer, meticulously reviewing plans and calculations. At home, I became a forensic accountant and private investigator. I maintained our apartment, watering her plants, collecting the mail, keeping everything exactly as she had left it. I wanted her to return to a scene of perfect normalcy, to believe that I was the same predictable, clueless man she had left behind. Her texts continued, a bizarre mix of condescending travel updates, vague complaints about the poor Wi-Fi, and eventually, a hint of annoyance at my silence. "Are you seriously giving me the silent treatment? We're adults, David. You need to get over your insecurities." Each message was a nail in her own coffin, and I dutifully forwarded them to Mark. Mark, in turn, was building his case. He hired a private investigator, a discreet ex-cop named Franklin, to get photographic evidence of the trip. The pictures arrived in a secure digital folder a few days later. They were clinical, shot from a long lens, but undeniable. Clara and Julian laughing on a beach. Clara and Julian holding hands over a candlelit dinner. Clara and Julian kissing on the balcony of their villa. I looked at them without emotion. This was not my wife. This was a stranger, and I was simply documenting her actions for a report. The hurt was a low, constant hum beneath the surface, but the methodical nature of my task kept it at bay. I was building a fortress of facts, and every photo was another stone in the wall. The most critical part of my plan involved our apartment. It was the only significant asset we shared, or so she thought. I had inherited it from my grandmother years before I met Clara. When we married, my lawyer at the time had advised me to keep it in my name. I had resisted, thinking it was unromantic, a sign of distrust. But the lawyer had been insistent, and I had reluctantly agreed. Clara, however, believed that under state law, it had become marital property through commingling of assets. She had often talked about our equity and how much we could get if we sold it. What she didn't know, what no one but my family and my lawyer knew, was that my grandmother hadn't just left me the apartment. She had left it to a trust, of which I was the sole trustee and beneficiary. The trust's terms were ironclad. The property could not be sold or transferred without the consent of a board that consisted of me, my father, and my uncle. It was, for all intents and purposes, untouchable in a divorce. This was my ace in the hole, the hidden variable in the equation. Clara came home on a Tuesday. I heard the key in the lock and braced myself. She walked in, tanned and glowing, dropping a designer suitcase by the door. She looked around the apartment, a flicker of surprise in her eyes that it was so clean, so orderly. She had expected a mess, a sign of my despair. "Well," she said, taking off her sunglasses. "The silent treatment is over, I hope. Did you miss me?" She was smiling, a confident, pitying smile. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in my hands. I had rehearsed this moment. Calm, factual, unemotional. "We need to talk, Clara." "Oh, we need to talk? This should be fun," she said, tossing her purse onto a chair. "Let me guess. You're mad. You have every right to be." I needed some space to think, to figure things out. That trip was about me, David. Not about hurting you. It was a masterclass in manipulation. A preemptive strike to frame herself as the thoughtful, soul-searching victim. I didn't take the bait. "I've spoken to an attorney," I said. Her smile faltered. The confidence wavered. This was not in her script. "An attorney? Isn't that a little dramatic? We're just having a rough patch." "I don't think so," I said, my voice level. "I think we're having a divorce." The color drained from her face. For a second, I saw real panic in her eyes, but her arrogance quickly reasserted itself. She laughed, a brittle, sharp sound. "A divorce? David, you can't be serious. You can't afford to divorce me. And on what grounds? You have no proof of anything." "I have everything I need," I said quietly. Her anger flared. "You're bluffing. You're just trying to scare me." "Fine. You want a divorce? Let's get a divorce. You'll regret this. I'll take you for everything you have. Half of this apartment is mine, you know. Half of your savings. Half of your pension. I'll be living comfortably while you're stuck in some tiny bachelor pad." She was laying out her entire strategy, her entire worldview, right there on the table. It was all about the money. It had always been about the money. I just looked at her. My silence a mirror she couldn't stand to look into. "Say something," she shrieked. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours," I said, standing up. I walked into the spare bedroom, where I had already moved my things, and closed the door. I heard a vase smash against the wall. I sat on the edge of the cot I had set up and listened to her rage echo through the apartment that was not, and had never been, hers. The demolition had begun. The next few weeks were a war of attrition waged by lawyers. Clara, true to form, hired the most aggressive, notoriously expensive attorney in the city, a man known for his scorched earth tactics. Her first move was to file a motion for temporary spousal support and exclusive use of the apartment. Mark just laughed when he read the filing. "Classic overreach," he said over the phone. "She's playing the victim. Let her." Clara, meanwhile, was living in the apartment as if she had already won. Her mother, Eleanor, became a frequent visitor, and I imagined them sitting in the living room, plotting how to spend my money. Clara's confidence was buoyed by her support system. Julian was still in the picture, and she was dropping his name constantly in texts to her friends, texts which, through a discovery motion, Mark eventually obtained. They were filled with mockery of me. My job, my car, my clothes. I was her sad, boring past. Julian was her glamorous future. Her lawyer's demands were absurd. She wanted 70% of all liquid assets, claiming I had emotional and financial control over her throughout the marriage. She wanted me to pay her legal fees, and she demanded we sell the apartment immediately and split the proceeds, with her getting a larger share to compensate for her emotional distress. Mark's response was a simple, two-word filing. "We contest." We agreed to a four-way settlement meeting at a neutral mediator's office. A week before the meeting, Mark's private investigator delivered his final report. Franklin had been looking into Julian Vance's tech company. It turned out the revolutionary software it was built on was not so revolutionary. In fact, it was stolen. The original programmers, a pair of college kids Julian had hired as interns and then fired, were suing him for intellectual property theft. The lawsuit was about to become public, and Franklin's source inside the firm said the evidence against Julian was overwhelming. His company was a house of cards, and the wind was picking up. "This is the external catalyst," Mark said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "Her upgrade is about to be seriously downgraded. Let's see how loyal she is when the money's gone." I suggested a different approach. I didn't want to wait for Julian's life to fall apart. I wanted Clara to see the first crack in her own facade because of me. I told Mark I wanted to meet with her, alone, before the official settlement conference. He advised against it, but I was insistent. This was one thing I had to do myself. I texted her, my first direct communication in over a month. Meet me at the Daily Grind. 10 a.m. tomorrow. We need to talk before the lawyers. Her reply was instant. Finally ready to be reasonable? Fine. But you're buying the next morning. I sat in a booth at the back of the coffee shop. I arrived early and ordered a black coffee. I watched her walk in, dressed in a new outfit I didn't recognize, looking impatient and annoyed. She slid into the booth opposite me. Okay, David, I have a spin class in an hour, so let's make this quick. What's your offer? She asked, not even making eye contact as she scrolled through her phone. I didn't say anything. I reached into the manila envelope I had brought with me and slid a single photograph across the table. It was one of Franklin's pictures. The one of her and Julian kissing on the villa balcony, the sunset glowing behind them. It was almost a beautiful picture, if you didn't know the context. She froze. Her eyes darted from the photo to my face and back again. The color drained from her cheeks. For the first time since this began, the mask of supreme confidence was gone. I saw fear. Where did you get this? She whispered, her hand trembling as she reached for the photo. Does it matter? I asked, my voice calm and even. This is Exhibit G, by the way. I have a through F as well. An H, I, and J. They're quite a collection. Very thorough. You had me followed? She hissed, her fear turning to fury. That's illegal. That's an invasion of privacy. My lawyer assures me it's perfectly legal discovery in an at-fault divorce state, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. Adultery is still a factor in asset distribution. Clara, she snatched the photo, her knuckles white. This doesn't prove anything. We're just friends. Friends who buy non-refundable, first-class tickets to St. Bart's together on a shared credit card while still married to other people? The credit card statements are Exhibit C. The travel agency itinerary is Exhibit E. It's all very well documented. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. She was seeing a version of me she had never encountered before. The quiet, predictable man was gone. In his place was a stranger who had facts, figures, and exhibits. What do you want, David? She finally managed to say, her voice small. I want you to understand the position you're in, I said, leaning forward slightly. You and your lawyer have made this a fight about money. You've accused me of financial control and emotional abuse. You've demanded 70% of everything. You seem to believe you hold all the cards. I'm here as a courtesy, to inform you that you have a very, very weak hand. I stood up, leaving my half-finished coffee on the table. I'll see you at the settlement conference on Tuesday. I suggest you talk to your lawyer. And I suggest you tell him the truth. I walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction. Just a profound, aching sadness for the man I used to be, the man who would have been destroyed by that photograph. That man was gone, and I wasn't sure if I missed him. The news about Julian's company broke the next day. It was front-page news in the business section. Tech CEO Julian Vance accused of fraud, intellectual property theft. His investors were pulling out. His company's value plummeted. He was, in a word, ruined. 2 days later, on a Sunday evening, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and saw Clara, standing in the hallway, looking small and broken. I opened the door. Her face was tear-streaked, her expensive clothes wrinkled. The confident woman from the coffee shop was gone. David, she sobbed. Can I come in? I stepped aside, and she walked into the living room. She looked around, as if seeing it for the first time. He left me, she said, her voice choked with tears. Julian, he's gone. His lawyers told him to cut all ties. He said I was a liability. He blocked my number. She collapsed onto the sofa, her body shaking with sobs. Everything is falling apart. The lawsuit, my lawyer called. He said your evidence, he said I'm going to get nothing. He wants a huge retainer to continue the case. I just stood there watching her. I felt a flicker of the old protective instinct, the urge to comfort her. But it died as quickly as it came. This was not about me. This was about her circumstances. I made a mistake, David, she said, looking up at me, her eyes pleading. A terrible, terrible mistake. I was lost. I was unhappy. Julian, he was just an escape. It was never real. What we had was real. She stood up and walked toward me, reaching for my hand. We can fix this. I know we can. We can withdraw the divorce filings. We can go to counseling. I'll do whatever it takes. I love you, David. I've always loved you. The words, which I had once longed to hear, now sounded hollow, rehearsed. It was another strategy, a desperate, last-ditch maneuver. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry for how it turned out. She was sorry she got caught. She was sorry she had backed the wrong horse. I gently pulled my hand away. No, Clara, I said, my voice soft but firm. We can't. Why not? She cried. People make mistakes. We can get past this. Because it's not a mistake, I said. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. A mistake is taking a wrong turn. What you did was a series of choices. You chose to lie. You chose to steal from our future. You chose to disrespect me and our marriage in the most profound way possible. And now you are choosing to come back to me only because your other option disappeared. I continued, my voice gaining strength. You don't love me. You love what I can provide. Stability. A safety net. You're not crying for us, Clara. You're crying for yourself. You're crying because you placed a bad bet and lost. Her face hardened, the tears drying up as anger took their place. You cold bastard, she spat. After everything I did for you. The statement was so absurd it was almost funny. What exactly did you do for me, Clara? I made you interesting. I gave you a life. Before me, you were just a boring engineer with no social skills. And now I'm just a boring engineer with no wife, I said. I think I prefer it. The settlement conference is on Tuesday at 9 in the morning. Please don't be late. I opened the door. She stared at me for a long moment. Her eyes filled with a hatred that was far more honest than her declaration of love had been. Then she turned and walked away. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it. The final beam of the old structure had been removed. Now all that was left was the cleanup. The mediation room was a study in beige and forced neutrality. Clara and her lawyer, a slick man named Donovan, were already there when Mark and I arrived. Clara wouldn't look at me. She was staring out the window, her jaw tight. Donovan, however, was all bluster and confidence, though I noticed his tie was slightly askew. He'd clearly had a rough few days with his client. The mediator, a retired judge named Henderson, called the meeting to order. Mr. Donovan, he said, why don't you begin with your client's position? Donovan launched into a speech about Clara's emotional suffering, her years of supporting my career, the sacrifices she had made. He painted a picture of a neglected wife, desperate for affection, driven into a brief, regrettable friendship by her husband's coldness. He concluded by reiterating their demand. The immediate sale of the marital home, a 60-40th split in her favor, plus 5 years of significant spousal support. Henderson listened patiently, then turned to us. Mr. Collins, your response? Mark smiled, a thin, predatory smile. Judge Henderson, my client's position is quite different. We will not be agreeing to the sale of the apartment, because it is not a marital asset. We will not be agreeing to spousal support, due to my client's egregious and well-documented marital misconduct. And far from my client paying Mr. Donovan's fees, we will be seeking to have Mrs. Miller cover our legal costs, in addition to reimbursing the marital accounts for the more than $85,000 she misappropriated over the last 2 years. Donovan sputtered. That's outrageous. The apartment is their primary residence. Of course, it's a marital asset. Is it? Mark said, opening his briefcase. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound document. This is the charter for the Miller Family Trust, established in 1988. As you can see on page 17, section 4, the property in question was deeded to the trust in 1995. My client, Mr. Miller, is the trustee, not the owner. He is granted right of residence, but he has no legal authority to sell the property. It is, and always has been, non-marital property. We have a signed prenuptial agreement addendum from your client acknowledging this, though I imagine she has forgotten about it. He slid a copy across the table. Clara stared at it, dumbfounded. I remembered the day we signed it, a week before the wedding. It was part of a stack of papers. I told her it was just a formality related to my grandmother's estate. She had signed it without reading. Donovan's face went pale. He flipped through the document, his bravado evaporating. This is highly irregular. It's ironclad, Mark said cheerfully. But let's move on. Let's talk about my client. The boring engineer, the man your client has accused of being financially controlling, while she was secretly spending thousands of dollars a month on luxury goods and trips with her lover. Mark then laid out the rest of it. He presented the bank statements, the credit card bills, the travel itineraries. He displayed Franklin's photographs on a large monitor. With each piece of evidence, Clara shrank further into her chair. And now, Mark said, his voice resonating with theatrical flair, for the final piece of the puzzle. Your client has operated under the assumption that my client is a man of modest means, that his $75,000 a year salary as an engineer represents the entirety of his wealth. This was a deliberate choice on my client's part. He wanted a partner who valued him for who he was, not for what he had. He placed another folder on the table. This contains the financial statements for the Miller Family Trust. As you will see, my client is not just the trustee. He is also the sole beneficiary. The trust's assets, comprised of commercial real estate and a diversified stock portfolio, are currently valued at approximately $47 million. A choked sound came from Clara. Donovan's jaw was on the table. My client has never touched a dime of the principal, Mark continued. He lives on his salary by choice, but the income generated by the trust is substantial. It is also, according to the trust's charter and the prenuptial agreement your client signed, entirely his, separate from any marital property. The room was silent. The only sound was the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Clara was staring at me, her face a mask of disbelief, horror, and a dawning, greedy realization that was a moment too late. She hadn't just cheated on a boring engineer. She had cheated on a secret millionaire. She had traded a life of unimaginable comfort and security for a cheap fling with a fraud. Henderson cleared his throat. He looked at Clara, his expression a mixture of pity and professional disdain. Mrs. Miller, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Given this new information, I would strongly advise you and your counsel to reconsider your position. Mr. Collins' offer is, frankly, far more generous than what you would likely receive in court. Mark's offer was simple. Clara would vacate the apartment within 30 days. She would walk away with her personal belongings, the clothes and jewelry she had bought with the money she'd taken, and the car we had co-owned, which I would sign over to her. In exchange, I would not pursue her for the $85,000 she had spent, and I would consider her debt to our marriage paid in full. She would get nothing else. No spousal support. No cash settlement. Nothing. Clara looked from the mediator to her lawyer to Mark and finally to me. Her eyes were wild. This can't be happening, she whispered. Then she screamed it. This can't be happening. She lunged across the table, not at me, but at the pile of documents, trying to rip them up, to somehow erase the truth. Donovan and Henderson had to physically restrain her. I stood up. I had seen enough. Mark, I said, my voice cutting through her sobs. We're done here, he nodded once. I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. I walked down the hallway, through the lobby, and out into the bright, clear morning. I took a deep breath. The air had never tasted so clean. That afternoon, I drove out to a piece of land I had bought 6 months earlier, using funds from the trust. It was a few acres of rolling hills about an hour outside the city. It was quiet, peaceful. I walked to the highest point, a spot with a clear view of the valley below. From my briefcase, I pulled out a roll of blueprints. They were the plans for the house I had designed for Clara and me. A big, sprawling house with a gourmet kitchen and a massive walk-in closet. A house for entertaining. A house for a life I no longer wanted. I looked at them for a long time, then I rolled them back up. I put them back in the briefcase and took out another, smaller roll. These were new plans I had been working on in the evenings for the past month. It was a smaller house, more honest. It was all clean lines and natural materials, with big windows to let in the light and a small workshop for me. A house for one. A foundation for a new life. I stood there as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the empty land. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The pain of Clara's betrayal was still a part of my story, a scar I would always carry. But it was no longer the whole story. I had survived. I had rebuilt. I learned that the strongest structures are not the ones that never face a storm, but the ones that are designed to withstand it, the ones built on a foundation of truth and self-respect. And my foundation was solid. I was ready to build again.